Hello, my name is John Goodwin. I'm the president of Galaxy Press, publisher of the fiction works of L. Ron Hubbard in the Writers of the Future anthology. Rise of the Future is a contest created by L. Ron Hubbard in 1983 to provide basically a helping hand for aspiring writers. It gave writers a chance for their works to be seen and acknowledged. And it's even more important now with over 3 million books published a year. Anything that can help get your voice above all the other din of writers wanting to get their voices heard. Even now, just winning an honorable mention will set you apart from the others because that's like the top 10 percentile. So it was created with that in mind, and it's just continued to grow over the last 41 years. Now we're in the almost halfway mark on year 42. And it was created specifically, so that the future of science fiction fantasy would be in good hands. And that's happened. We've got almost 1,000 winners now over the last 41 years, including this year, of both writers and illustrators. We're very honored that we've got Jody Lynn Nye as our coordinating judge for the writing contest, and Echo Chernick as the coordinating judge for the illustrator contest. And it's basically today is the 21st of February, 2025. And I would like to welcome you to the live author Q&A with Rise of the Future coordinating judge, Jody Lynn Nye. Since 1987, Jody has published over 50 books and more than 200 short stories. Over the last 20 or so years, Jody Lynn Nye has taught numerous writing workshops and participated on hundreds of panels covering the subject of writing and being published at science fiction conventions. In 2007, she taught fantasy writing at Columbia College Chicago. She also runs the 2-day writing workshop at DragonCon. Jody became a Rise of the Future judge in 2016 and became the coordinating judge in 2022. So welcome, Jody. And if you'd like to say a few words, help yourself.
Glad to be here. So I recognize a few names of winners in this crowd, but the rest of you are also potential winners. So ask me things.
Absolutely.
Please.
So just one more time then, make sure you keep yourselves muted so you don't distract the rest of the chat with any outside noises. Post your questions in the chat and we'll handle in the sequence that they're listed. Emily's going to be posting a link to the pre-order volume 41, and it looks something like this. So please post a nerd emoji when you pre-order. It's really an amazing book. It's nice and thick with lots of beautiful stories and art. The cover was created by Craig Elliott, and the story against this art was written by contest winner and judge Sean Williams. So with that, let's get going then with our questions. So the first question we have here is, lots of hellos. Okay, this is from Lee Rector. What characteristics of a story set apart a semifinalist or finalist from a silver honorable mention?
Ooh, that's a tough one. Silvers are frequently as good as a finalist, but the difference that sets them apart, Dave Farland always said it was confidence. And I think that there's something to be said about that. A silver story has a spark. It has a liveliness to it that an honorable mention doesn't quite have yet. For all its good plotting, it doesn't have the same kind of characteristic that compels the reader to keep reading, in spite of the fact that there are deadlines or dinner or something else that they should be doing, that their eye is just continuing to be dragged down the page. For a finalist, I am really, really fussy. It has to be something that I can't help but read, even if it's in a subgenre that I don't particularly care for. I'm not a huge horror fan, for example, but the characters intrigue me, the world building intrigues me, and it doesn't retread over old ground. If I get something that I say, oh yeah, this is a bog standard hero goes to rescue a girl from a dragon, hoop-de-doo, what new thing can you say about it, or what new perspective can you put on it? And if it really thrills me, then yeah, if I can't resist it, then I'm going to put it before my fellow judges.
Good. Thank you.
I have to say, semifinalists are different. There may be too much in common with something that is going in as a finalist, but just as frequently, a semifinalist is a story that is really excellent, but for one reason or another cannot be published by the contest. We are a specific market. So themes that are too adult, themes that are too violent, political, religious, there's a lot of things that we don't cover. But if it's a truly excellent story, all the same, I might give it a semifinalist. But the biggest one is, does it have a spec lit element? And if it doesn't, we are a spec lit contest, but it's still excellent. That's also something that instead of being rejected, it may get a semifinalist. I have one that came in my second or third quarter that was profoundly good, but it had no spec lit element. And to have added one would have ruined the story. And if a story comes in and has no spec lit element, but it doesn't measure up to that particular story, it doesn't have a chance.
Okay, good. All right. Michelle Diaz asks, what are a few things that for you personally you don't like in a story? Not so much as plot, bad story structuring, though feel free to say any of that too, but more of pet peeves. Thanks.
Footnotes. None of you are Terry Pratchett. Don't put footnotes in it. You can't explain a foreign concept or an alien concept in context, then you need to go back and figure out how to do that. Another problem is prologues and epilogues. Short stories rarely have room for prologues and epilogues. If it's something that is very, very important, why is your prologue not just the first part of the story? How do you need to get that information across to the reader? When I teach writing, I usually say death to prologues. You should think of a prologue the same way that you think of a heart transplant. You should only have one if you really, really need it.
Okay.
Other things that annoy me are, we call it failure to launch. If it takes too long for you to get to the point of the story, to get into the action, then you started the story too soon. And even if it's really excellent, I get annoyed that I can't tell what the story is about. So bear in mind that you don't have a lot of real estate with a short story. So get to the point, get to where we are involved with what the matter is, that the story is important. Who is it important to? Who is the right person to take this story through to the end? And introduce us to the problem as soon as you can. I'm not saying start out, with a crash bang fight on page one, but at least let us know what's important as soon as you possibly can.
Good. Thank you. Next question. This is from Cray Dimensional. If you could give only one piece of advice to an aspiring writer, what would it be?
One I had wished I had given to myself is, don't wait for somebody to give you permission to write. Write. Don't let somebody tell you that there's something that you can't write. You can. If it's a delicate subject, or it is told from the point of view or about people whose group you do not belong to, then I strongly suggest you run it past people who belong to that group. So I would say, dare to write something and figure out where you want to go with it after that. Like they say about freedom of speech is not freedom from consequences, but artists dare. They have to. We're the ones who explore the world around us and give our perspective to people who read or view our art. So try, dare, write that story, because we're all waiting to read it.
Great. Thank you. So what do you wish you could tell your younger self as an author? This is from Chase Williams.
Okay, Chase. When I was 19, I wrote a story and sent it to Analog, the great science fiction magazine. I sent it to Stanley Schmidt, who was at the time the editor. He was the editor for many, many years. And he sent back a letter to me that said, well, I've seen this plot before, but I really like your style, so send me something else. And I didn't. I never did. I never sent him a story. And I told him many years later, in fact, only a few years ago, about that. And he said, chide, chide, chide. If I told you I wanted another story from you, I meant it. I did not know at the time that getting a personalized letter from an editor was a big deal. Normally, you just got a form letter that said, thank you so much. Your story does not meet our needs at this time. Sincerely. I didn't realize that a fully personalized letter was important. So I would go back and tell myself, send him another story, send him something else. It would have started my career years earlier.
Great, thank you. So Gavin Keon wrote, hi, Jody, what most contributed to your success as a writer?
Wow. Probably audacity, because I wanted stories to exist that didn't exist. And this is something that I do tell my students. If you see a gap, that there's a story that you want told that doesn't exist yet, you write it. That's what I did. I started out like anybody else writing fanfic about media properties that I admired, acting out stories with my friends and my brothers, telling stories to my fellow campers at sleepaway camp. I had stories to tell. I wanted to tell them. So finding a willing audience wasn't a bad thing.
Good, good. So what books had the most impact on your journey? This is from Chase Williams.
Oh, let's see. So many of them. I read a lot. I read science fiction, fantasy, mysteries, a lot of nonfiction. But if I had to look at books that I was reading while I was growing up, the first science fiction book I ever read was called The Incredible Flight to the Mushroom Planet. It was I couldn't have been more than 6. So that is the thing that put a story into my hands, that something I couldn't or hadn't up until that point pictured. So it opened up my mind to fantasy, science fiction literature, speculative fiction, whereas most of the stuff that they hand to small children used to be very, very boring. It was the Dick and Jane books, the Sea Spot Run, the Bobbsey twins, things that could have taken place on this planet with people that I could actually know or that could have happened to me. And I really didn't want to read about people like me. I wanted to read about people who went to space, people who encountered aliens or aliens themselves. So that's probably the beginning of it. But another important one was I love Mark Twain, and anything he wrote, I loved his voice. But A Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's Court meant a lot to me. So it was the first portal story, the first time travel story that I ever read, the first humorous science fiction story I ever read. And I like to write humor.
Great, thank you. And do you think there's value in self-publishing? That's also from Chase. That's the second question in that batch.
With one caveat, I would say that self-publishing has become more respectable and in fact very profitable for some of my friends. Some of them do very well in self-publishing. That said, you should never, ever take something that you have just written and throw it online. You should treat it exactly as if it were going to a publishing house. Find yourself an editor. If you don't trust your own work, find a developmental editor who can read over your stuff and say, okay, it's been 8 chapters since we saw the villain. Let's go back and find your antagonist again. Or this ending just trails off. It doesn't do anything for the story. An editor can be your best advocate, just as they are at a publishing house. So budget for an editor and get good cover art if you're going to publish it yourself. You can do it. Lots of people do. I have a couple of friends who do very well out of it, but treat it as if it was a business.
One thing I've also, a couple of the recent podcasts I've done, not using a self-publishing, they call it author publishing. So, because it's a team, you got, like you just said, there's three people that are minimum. You have yourself as the author, you have to have an editor of some sort, and you need to have a cover artist, someone that can really give it. That's the minimum package you need to know that you're going to come out there and have a good presentation that people will go like, I like that guy or I like that gal. I mean, that's absolutely correct. Okay, so Sherry Newman wrote to everyone, question for your own writing, Jody, was there a turning point for you when you realized you had your style figured out and were happy with your skill level, or has it been a gradual arc? If there was a turning point, do you know what brought that on or helped you achieve it?
I'm not sure. I am still learning. I always will be learning. I see things, I learn from reading other people's work. I learn from just doing too. I had David Gerald come to talk to my class once, and he said, the first million words don't count because you're still learning. And if you if your stuff gets thrown back to you for that first million, it doesn't count. It's fine. It's your first million. It doesn't matter. Everything is practice. If you write a scene and you have to take it out of a book or a short story, don't throw it away, put it aside. Everything is learning. So I am told, a fairly distinctive style when I'm doing mostly contemporary writing, but I'm a chameleon. I can write in other people's styles. I worked with Robert Asprin. I worked with Anne McCaffrey. I can fall into their word choices and their sentence structures. Also, depending on what I'm writing, if I'm writing medical science fiction, it has a different feel than my contemporary humorous fantasy. So I'll be using different vocabulary choices, different cadence, different chapter lengths. So it matters what I'm writing. There are people who write the same kind of book all the time, say, uh, people who write only military science fiction have a very distinctive style all the time. But I think that if you read one of my subgenres versus another, you'll find differences, but you'll also find similarities. So it's just been happening over time.
Good, yeah. And interesting enough, when I interviewed Jim Butcher last year, and I asked him, so what's a good book to start with? And he said, probably volume 7 of Dresden Files. Is at that point I finally started building my own voice and felt comfortable with in my shoes on that. So yeah, it's like what you said there. It's like be willing to like just keep on growing and learning. At some point, you're going to like come into your own. If it's a million words, then there you go. That's not the first time I've heard that figure. Um, and this is now from Natasha. And she says, could you explain the difference between a professional and an amateur author? I've read the rules several times and I'm sure if I qualify as an amateur. So he's talking about I guess the rules for writers of the future, which I will
Right.
go ahead and say what specific the rules say, then you can go over also perspective of a professional separate from that. So to disqualify from writers of the future is 3 short stories or a novel over 5,000 and paid for professional rates, which is currently 8 cents a word, or whatever was professional rates in the past when you're published. Has to be over 5,000 hits or sales for that work to count as a pro sale. So that's the definition in Writers of the Future. But in terms of what you've observed yourself, Jody, in terms of a pro versus an amateur.
The difference between a pro and an amateur is where you paid. Uh, you may still uh, have a lot to learn, even if you're a professional, but a lot of it is attitude. The moment that you actually hit send or put something into a mailbox to send to a publisher, you're a professional for better or worse, whether or not the publisher buys your work. But it's important to remember that you have to act like a professional from that moment on. If you harass the editor or complain about the editor online or send them spam, like what have you read my story yet? What did you think of it? Tell me how wonderful it was. That's amateur behavior for a would-be professional. So the moment you put something into the mail to them, behave like a professional, be courteous, be patient, because they're all overrun with submissions from everybody, including people that they have solicited, not just you, not just the hundreds of or thousands of other people who want to publish with that editor. So
Great.
a lot of it's attitude.
Yes. And then the second part of her question is, so if we don't make it into the anthology, but we get something like an honorable mention or finalist position, are there any other places you would recommend we submit our stories?
Well, I'd say the same thing that for any book. Send it to the people whose work you read. If you happen to read, say, Cemetery Dance, and you like to write that kind of horror, send your story to them. Or if you are writing speculative fiction and it's on the short side, try Galaxy's Edge. There are a lot of places out there that are accepting short fiction. There's a Facebook page that shows open markets, but you can also find open markets on the sfwa.org page. Go down the line. Don't try to send them something that doesn't fit in their work, which is why I say submit to the people you already read, because they're the ones who are probably going to publish the kind of thing that you're writing.
Good. Thank you. So this is from Casey Coleman. I'm having a horrible time with long form serialized plotting. What practice would you recommend for keeping the multi-thread storylines together? I have plenty of shorts written.
Okay. If you want to write like long fiction, then you're going to have to outline or set up something like a system where you're keeping track of the various storylines. Cherry Adair does a class. I think she even wrote a book about how to keep them straight. She found out that there are something like 54 different colors of Post-it notes, and she uses most of them in her system. Each character in a scene has their own Post-it note. It says what everybody is doing. Some of the Post-it notes are to keep track of time and location, and very important to keep track of your timeline. But pacing comes into this as well. If you set it up like a big calendar or take over an entire wall, you'll be able to see how long it's been since a particular character showed up. You'll be able to see when you are bringing in a new obstacle for your heroes to meet. And especially if you are braiding different timelines together or braiding different character arcs together, you need to keep track of where they are, what each of them knows, and what other elements you're introducing at the time. So it is some complicated bookkeeping. The nice thing about Post-it notes is you can peel one small Post-it note off something and put it somewhere else or rewrite it and put it back on again without having to say, take apart a whole flow chart. You have a modular flow chart with Post-it notes. And I think that was a very clever thing that she talked about. So look into breaking down all of the parts of your story into measurable elements: timeline, location, who's present in a scene, and in fact, what the scene is meant to accomplish, because every scene needs to have at least three purposes: telling you something about the characters, moving the plot along, introducing new obstacles, and so on. There's several different functions a scene can have, but all of them must have a meaning.
Great, thank you. Tim Powers commented once, you were talking about thinking the Post-it notes. He used to use 3x5 cards and he laid them all out on this floor. And then when somebody opened up the front door and the wind blew in, and then it just went floosh. So the Post-it note sounds like a little bit more of a stable reference point there to be able to keep track of your story.
They stick in place. It's helpful.
Exactly, exactly. All right. Here we have from Montgomery Kelly. Can a flash fiction win silver honorable mention? We were just talking about flash fiction.
We were, and yes, it can.
Yeah. The last story
I
in
don't
volume
think
30.
I don't think I can say anything right now, but yes, it can.
Yeah, and volume 38, which is the last story ever written by Dave Wolverton, Dave Farland, was flash fiction. He said, look, this is proof that flash fiction can make it into Writers of the Future. So there you go. All right. Question from Heidi Summer. Summer. Uh, does the age of the characters in the short story matter for Writers of the Future? I know for young adult fiction, there's a preference for the characters to be teen or young adult based on your target audience. So does certain character ages do better?
It depends on what's appropriate to the story. Your protagonist should always be the right person to carry the story forward. We don't publish children's fiction, as you know, but you can have a young adult protagonist. It's just your plot needs to be sophisticated enough that I don't look at this and say, this is a children's story. I've had to reject a few that were perfectly good stories, but they were not for us. So, are you telling a story that adults are going to look at and say, yes, I am interested in this? Is it an important enough concept? And I don't mean that it has to be earth-shattering. Small stories are just as good as big stories, as long as they're well told, as long as they're well thought out. We have one coming up in the new volume that has the only narrator in it is possible teenager, might be a tween. It's hard to say.
Yeah, and you also have that one book. Was it Magic 101? Is that
Mythology 101?
Mythology 101? Yeah.
Keith is 18. Yeah.
Yeah, he's a teen. So, and that's an awesome book, so
No, thank you.
absolutely. Okay, next question from Autumn Needles. When you say Wolf has a particular target audience, can you describe who that is?
We have people from young adults all the way up. We have people who are interested in speculative fiction. It is a speculative fiction market. If your story doesn't have a speculative fiction element, I cannot give it a grade. It will come back to you. The thing I would say is we're looking for compelling stories that have an important effect on the people who are involved in it, who really immerse them in it. If it seems to be something that is easily dismissed, then it's not going to be of interest to our readers. I always say, if you're bored writing it, we'll be bored reading it.
Right.
So keep in mind that a good story doesn't have to be about an earth-shattering topic, but what happens in it matters to the characters. And we have stories that go all over the genre, absolutely everywhere. I'm looking at a few right now. One of them, I had no idea what I was going to encounter when I read into it, and it's medium horror, but it was compelling. I couldn't stop reading it. And I've looked at other things that should have been more interesting and felt incredibly long because nobody seemed to be as bothered by the plot as they should have been. I really want people to understand that it matters how important the outcome is to the characters.
Good. One thing too is like we have military, we go to events and conventions all over, and the audience for Writers of the Future is all ages. We have a lot of military that we sell a lot of books to. We have a lot of military that enter this contest, and it's we end up winning 2 or 3 best book of the year in anthologies and in science fiction fantasy contests every year. We get many starred reviews routinely from major trade publications and online publications. So what you see in Rise of the Future are the stories that win, but these are stories that are selling to across the board from middle school on up. So we've been saying this for decades. If you want to know what the next level of science fiction and fantasy professionals are, it's in Writers of the Future. And if you know what's winning, what's the demarcation between amateur and professional, it's in Writers of the Future. That is what it is. And that's why it is the most popular writing competition for science fiction and fantasy to date right now. So there's nothing else like it. It's free to enter. It's totally blind judge. So Jody has no idea who she's reading when she sees these stories, nor do the other judges. It's just a number. So the people that win the contest truly are the best of the best, no matter what age, nationality, ethnic, religion, anything. It's just they are the best of the best. And we have a lot of entries. And with that, I shall move on to the next question. This is from Eric Sisko. What are some techniques you can use to make a short story stand out amongst maybe hundreds or thousands of stories in the slush pile?
Be excited by it. That your involvement in it will come out in your prose. And try to give something a new spin. We have a lot of things that we call tropes that my slushers are on the lookout for. Retelling of fairy tales. One that our late lamented Dave Wolverton called Cry for the Robot, where you end up feeling sorry for the robot that has been left behind by its previous owners. There's one that I hate the twist where the story ends with saying, I'm, holding this baby in my arms and well, Mr. Franklin, what are you going to call him? I think I'll call him Benjamin. And I just groan. These are things to avoid. Surprise me earlier. Make me want to know what your ending is. You can make me laugh at the end. I love humorous stories. The last story in the book of our current volume is very, very funny. It's called Butter Side Down. And it involves a human being doing what humans do, which is trying to make friends with everything in the galaxy, making friends with a device. And that's all I'll say. You should read the story.
It's an awesome story.
It's awesome. It's a great story. Surprise me. Delight me. Make me want to read this story. And the more excited you are about that, I think that the energy will come through. I can't really tell you what techniques you can use because I don't know what kind of writer you are.
Okay, great. Natasha Bajima wrote, how would you describe the genre of speculative fiction? What makes a story spec fic, and when is a story not speculative fiction?
Okay. If it doesn't have magic or some kind of unique technology in it, it probably isn't fantasy or science fiction. If there's just a bunch of people having an adventure or having a situation happen to them, that you could take them out of that situation and plant them anywhere in history or anywhere in geography, and it wouldn't make any difference, it's probably not speculative. If there's no speculative fiction element, then there is no change in the world that makes a difference. So yeah, alternate history will apply. We've had a couple of good alternate history stories, but usually it's what is the change in the world that the story is making. So if I could take this war story out of World War I, and I could put it into any war in history, I can put it into a war across the world right now, it wouldn't make any difference. That's not spec lit. It's just another story. It's just another war story. But if, for example, somebody has plucked a general out of the Roman era and put him into a situation in 19th century France, that would be different. That would be something that is speculative fiction, because that is taking a change that cannot be made in an ordinary situation. And of course, including magic. Magic always changes things. But that said, don't make it just the setting. The speculative element has to impact the ending of the story. And because if you have made somebody the protagonist, they have to be involved in bringing about that ending. So that's just story structure.
Good. Thank you. Okay. So Chase once again says, I'm so glad hearing that self-publishing is still a successful route. Having a developmental editor is fantastic advice. Thank you.
You're very welcome.
Several wonderful answer. Here's another question from Suman Han. What makes for a really satisfying short story, particularly for writers of the future? And I will say before I'll cut you off on that, just read the books. That's what makes really satisfying short stories for writers of the future, because they're the ones that made it in there. Go back to the last several books, you'll find the answers to that. But that said, now your turn, Jody.
What makes a really satisfying short story is where you fulfill the promise you made to the reader at the beginning. If you say that they are going to go and get this wonderful, unique device that is going to solve the problem that exists around the main character, and you do that, now remember, a successful story, the protagonist can also fail, but they will learn something else. A protagonist always grows a little bit in a story. So if I'm satisfied with the ending, if I think that they have figured something out about their world, whether or not it's a nice thing, because I'm reading a story right now that not particularly nice, but the protagonist did figure something out about herself. That satisfies the reader. And I'm a sucker for a happy ending, but I understand that some stories by necessity have to have a sad ending or a tragic ending or a brutal ending, but make it work. The other thing that I have to remind you is because we have young adult readers, keep the gore to a minimum, keep the sex off stage. We don't put that into, and especially if it's important to the story, take it somewhere else.
Good, good. In your opinion, what ingredients make a successful author?
What is what?
In your opinion, what ingredients makes a successful author? Rosemary and thyme and a little bit of honey. What ingredients make a successful author?
I would say chocolate. Uh,
Exactly.
but the old joke about a caffeine a programmer is someone that turns caffeine into code. So writers, in my case anyway, are people who make chocolate into words. So what makes a successful writer? Perseverance, willingness to learn, a willingness to listen and read other people's work. You cannot be a successful writer without reading other people's work. You need to know what's out there, but you also need to understand that people will have a different perspective on how to approach something. And even if you don't follow what the other person does, it will matter because you have learned what you don't want to do from reading that other person. I have a lot of writers that I have read that I say, oh, that's okay, that's interesting. Yeah, I wouldn't do it that way. But contrary-wise, I would also say, I wish I could do what that person does. I wish I could do what Terry Pratchett does. I wouldn't mind growing up to be Diane Duane. There are people whose works I really, really am passionate about. And learning to read them elevates my sense of what literature can be. And I love that. I love looking at something and saying, I will get to the point where I can do this to my own satisfaction, or I'm glad this exists. I don't ever want to do this. I don't have to do this. But this person's writing it so I can read it.
Yeah. And one tip I've gotten several times before too is read it the first time to enjoy it, then read it the second time, how they do that. So you can like come to understand how they actually created that, made you have to turn the page or make you fall in love with that person, because there's a technique, like there's just, good writers do something, then they do it a very special way that really pulls you into it? How do they do that? And that's important as well. And another question here is, let's say you have 100 ideas for a story. What key components do you look for to decide which ones will be worth developing?
Sometimes that's trial and error. A lot of it is experience. If you have 100 different ways you can tell a story, start writing one of them. They're not all going to be good. I don't care who you are. 100 ways to write a short story. You're never going to get through all of them. I know too many people with piles and piles of manuscripts in their closets or file after file on their computer. You're never going to write all of them. Focus. So if one doesn't work, put it aside. It's the effort was not wasted. You learned something about your plot. You learned something about the idea that you had, and maybe that will help you frame the one that will be successful, the one that will go forward. There are too many times that you're going to run into an impenetrable dead end, and that's okay, because not every idea is going to work. Sometimes they're what I call a talking dog. Somebody, comes to me excitedly and said, "I've got this story. It's about a talking dog." And say, "Okay, what is it about?" And it's about a dog who can talk. Okay, why is this important? What are you going to do with it? What effect does this dog have on the world? What effect does this dog have on the person who found it? What is this dog going to do? I don't know, but it's a talking dog. That's not a story. That's an idea. Everything gets expanded, and a lot of things fall by the wayside. They just do. You'll figure out the one that's going to work. Experience will tell you which ones you don't even have to bother to start on.
Good. Good answer. Thank you. Is there a gap, and this is from Duke Holly, is there a gap in the stories you're seeing between being submitted? Are there types of stories you're not seeing and would love to read?
I see a lot of stories. Mind you, I am not seeing all of them. I have a slush team, and they are the ones who go through and they winnow out the ones that aren't going to work for us for one reason or another. Read the rules. We don't accept plays, essays, poetry, and there's a number of other things that we don't accept for subject matter reasons. That said, I still see a huge variety of stories that people want to try out, want to show me. So I'm seeing alternate history, I'm seeing military science fiction, I'm seeing military fantasy. So over the course of the 3 years I've been doing this, I've seen a lot of different subgenres go by, and some really great ideas, some that I wish were better. When you find yourself trying to body English a story into really fulfilling its potential, breaks my heart when they don't. So I see a lot of storylines go by. I don't know what I haven't seen yet. Surprise me.
There we go. That's the best answer. That's the standard Jody answer. Surprise me. And that's the best answer. All right. So question from Chase again. What are the most common errors you see from beginning or young authors?
Ooh, no description. I see this all the time. The conversation between the characters is taking place in a blank white room by a couple of disembodied voices. Describe what's in your head. If it isn't on the page, it doesn't count. That's the first and most foremost thing that I see with young writers. I get this with my students all the time. They don't tell you what's happening. They don't tell you where it is, what the characters look like, anything. I get and believe me, it's a mealy-mouthed excuse. Well, I want the person to be able to picture themselves in the story, so I don't want to describe the character. Nonsense. I and my friends were perfectly able to put ourselves into stories, even though the characters were described and they were nothing like us, because the situation was so exciting and wonderful. We wanted to be in it regardless. So you can do that. You can describe your character. They can be a perfectly well-realized character. It doesn't matter what they look like. It doesn't matter who they are. We'll picture ourselves in the situation if we want to. God knows how many unsuitable dragon riders we have spawned that look nothing like and couldn't pass the physical to impress a dragon, believe me. So there's just so much scope, so much possibility.
Good. And this is one of the responses from Chase, who says, I love this. Buying Post-it notes tomorrow, LOL. Currently working on a multi-plot level. This is so helpful. Thank you.
Oh, pleasure. Happy to help. I found that it didn't necessarily work for me, but uh, it made my note taking much more comprehensive. One of the things, especially if you're writing a multi-volume series, and this has absolutely nothing to do with the writers of the future, but it's important for your career, keep a Bible of your of your world. So, where do the characters first appear? Does the main character come in chapter one? Maybe not. What do they look like? Who are their parents? Or their situation? Do they have pets? Are there items that they have with them that are important to have? If they lose it, where do they lose it? Do they lose it in chapter 8? Good. Do they get it back in chapter 13? Make a note of that. If a story Bible will help you enormously because you can go back and say, oh yeah, I killed him off in chapter 30. I can't put him into the next thing. I'll have to find somebody else. That's okay. Characters are free. And that's, oh, by the way, that's another thing that let me go back to the previous thing where there's a problem with stories. Medieval situations are very, very labor intensive. Kings did not pour their own wine. There are lots and lots and lots of people. And you know what? You're not central casting in Hollywood. You don't have to pay these characters. You can have as many of them as you want. Please populate your stories.
Good. All right. This is from Duke Holly. You mentioned that you learn from reading other people's stories. How do you go about analyzing stories to learn from them instead of just getting swept away in the story?
Oh my God. After a while of reading stories, you can't help but edit them, especially if you're writing, because you have been figuring out how to write for yourself. And as you learn to do the tips and tricks of the trade, like how to draw a character in, how to make somebody who is not very appealing, how to make a character seem to be all good, but 95% good, but 5% bad, so that it's perceptible to the reader, so that they can say at the end, oh yeah, I knew it was him all the time. You can't help but read like an editor after a while. And it's dismaying because you start reading things that you thought you were reading for pleasure and you find that you're analyzing anyway. I was reading a story by a famous science fiction author whom I admire. And I came to this point when I said, oh, fill in the name, you didn't. I was horrified at myself. I was chastising a great of our field for pulling a trick, for doing something that I thought was a cheap way of approaching a moment. So you'll learn to do it. You just will.
Good, good. Another one from Duke. For people who love to do world building and often come up with stories from the setting first, how do we create compelling characters? So
My
the
first
setting
book,
first, then creating compelling characters.
which as you can tell, John likes, Mythology 101, came from a location. It came from my college library. I had the setting first. And it started to make ideas in my head. And it's the what if? What if in this really neat library where I can hear voices even when I'm alone on a floor, what if there are people here? What if people live here? What if there are people living in the basement of the library? Who are they? And you start asking yourself questions. And then I want to explore this. So who's likely to do that exploring? Who is likely to be the best person to be my main character? The person who is going to examine the situation and figure it out? Who's going to have the energy for that? who's curious enough. And before I knew it, I was designing my main character. So you can do that from the beginning. You can do it from your world building. It's always the right person who is going to solve the problem, even if they can't do it at the beginning. By the time they finish with the story, they should be able to complete the exercise, solve the problem, or they won't. Like I said, sometimes stories are unsuccessful.
Good. Thank you. And then from KZ Richards, what tips do you have for determining the scope of a short story versus a novel crammed into a short story?
Okay, a short story is a very small piece of real estate. You have room for one plot element. It starts out at the beginning and it resolves one way or the other by the end. You have the energy bubble, the energy arc that you have to expend by the end. So it's technically starting here, the energy builds, 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 and then it starts to fade away. And then there's the denouement, the resolution, which is kind of like a little tail on the end of your arc. You have room for one of those. You can introduce in a longer short story a few extra elements to it, but in the end, you are answering one question. Can this young wizard create a work that is going to save their world, country, mother from this disaster that's coming? And the answer is yes or no. And what kind of resolution you're going to get out of that? A lot of uh, a lot of it can be expressed in tone. You're not going to have a tragic story that has a comic voice to it, for example, unless you're a really, really cynical person. With a novel, you are introducing the problem at the beginning. And if you look at books like Save the Cat by Blake Snyder or John Truby's book, there's a couple of others that are good for looking at what they call beats, what Blake Snyder calls beats. He writes screenplays, but there's a woman called Jessica Brody, which took his Save the Cat screenplay pattern and created Save the Cat Writes a Novel. So that's something that you could look into. It tells you the parts of the story that take place in a novel and about where they tend to fall in the way that we in the West like to tell stories. Now, this is not the only way to tell stories. There are storytelling traditions all over the world, and they're all different. But the publishing houses in the West, we tend to have the problem arises, the character is introduced to the problem, the character refuses the quest at first, but then is sucked into it, starts to achieve small victories, runs into obstacles, encounters the antagonist, and then reaches a point at the center. This is all Blake Snyder stuff, where they discover that what they want is not necessarily what they need, and the rest of the story is devoted to getting what they need. So there are points of the story that tend to be common for almost every kind of story that you would tell in the West. Save the Cat Goes to the Movies will show you a great number of films that use those. It indicates what beats fall where, so that you can say, oh yeah, this is Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets. This is Gone with the Wind. All of these things fall into discernible patterns. So you can learn a lot about how much you can put into it. Every main character has their own story, their own story arc, their own character arc. The story itself has to do the same arc from beginning to end, because you must expend all of the energy that you have been building up by the end of the story. Otherwise, it doesn't feel satisfying. If you have left loose ends,
Good.
even if you plan a sequel, satisfy the reader.
Great.
I could go on. I mean, I teach classes in this.
Okay, good. Thank you. And just a reminder for those of you who haven't, This is available now for pre-order. This is volume 41, Rise of the Future. It'll be releasing April 20th. And we're trying to get people to pre-order it right now so that it ships and you have it then for April 20th. So go ahead and you can go to either Galaxy Press to be able to find it, or go to Amazon.com and pre-order it there. And put the nerd emoji in there. Emily will post the link here in the chat so you can see it, so you can go ahead and pre-order it. But we really like, one of the things that we love being able to do with Rise of the Future is helping to make best-selling authors. And when this book releases and it's a best-selling book, then we just made 12 new best-selling artists and 12 new best-selling authors. And our judges that are involved with it also gets another little feather in their cap too, as best-selling authors too. So please, if you've not done so, please take a few minutes and actually pre-order this book. All right.
What else we got?
We got M. Gamble C. Chocolate? How about C's Candies? Okay, good. Yeah. Casey Coleman, everyone should do Flash Fiction Month. It helps make stories less precious, cranks up your ability to write quickly. Okay. Thank you, Jody, for these thoughtful answers. They mean a lot to me, and I will treasure your encouraging words. I'm so grateful.
Oh, happy to help, really.
Good. Do you have a few recommended Flash Fiction stories to read and study? And this is from Lee Rector.
Flash fiction stories? I
Volume
haven't.
38, Dave Overton, Dave Farland had a story in Rise of the Future, volume 38. Flash fiction, enjoy that one. There we go. That's my offer. That was the last story he ever wrote.
Yep, we lost Dave too soon.
Yes.
But there's, I wouldn't say just read flash fiction. I would say write a lot. Try things, try out a new storyline. Roger Zelazny went through a period where he wrote a new short story every day. You don't have to do that. You have other lives. You have other things that you should be doing. But hey, write a new short story every quarter. Send it to me.
Good. All right. Another question here. Does also being an editor impact your own writing, either positively or negatively?
Positively. The more you know about editing, the more that you are already making decisions about your work while you're writing it. I would not recommend this to everybody, but both Dean Wesley Smith, who is a fellow judge, and not only that, a previous winner of the contest, year one, we edit while we write. I don't recommend this to everybody necessarily because you're interrupting your writing to go back and edit. I would say write to the end of your day, and then the next day, reread a few of the pages that you wrote the day before so that you can pick up where you left off. And never end a chapter on the night before. Always leave a half a page, leave a paragraph before you put your work away, because that will get you thinking. It will get you going.
Good, good. This is from Heidi Sumner. You mentioned populate your story. I'm always worried about putting too many named characters in a short story. Have you seen patterns in successful short stories when it comes to the number of characters? What is your advice there?
We don't need to know anything about these characters, but we need to see them. We need to see that there's a milkman delivering milk on his ox cart. We need to see the serving girl walking with the yoke of buckets of water to know what kind of world we're in. Is there a cobbler, or do we have a shoe factory? There's a lot of that will tell people about the world that you live in. Are people in rags, or are people in fancy clothes? Do you have a mix? It gives you the opportunity to draw people in and say, here's the world. People have large families in this, or they don't. They ride single scooters, or they have an ox cart full of kids. There's a lot of things that you can do with populating your world that also draws that world. But if it's just, there's this big castle over here, there's a shop here, there's one hearty landlord of the pub, but there never seems to be anybody drinking in it. You don't have to mention the names of the people who are drinking at the bar, but to say, 5 men in the corner who were always there. That tells you something about the story that gives you a background because the story didn't begin. The world didn't begin on page one of your story. The world began hundreds of years before, millions of years before. By giving us people, we know what kind of world we have. You have the person who always bullied your character. This kid is coming towards your protagonist, and the protagonist very, very carefully walks to the other side of the street to not be walking on the same side as his, her, or their bully. There's lots of things that you can do by populating your world, and it's character building as well as populating your world building.
Good, thank you. So this is from another Chase. What are the cheapest plot tricks that you see in literature that ruin what would have been an otherwise great work?
Oh, tying a bow on it. I can't watch E.T. ever again because of the stupid rainbow at the end. It's too much. I hated that so much, and I hated it the moment I saw it. It would have been just fine without it. Steven Spielberg does brilliant, wonderful, profound adult films. Films for adults, I should say. Let me put it that way. But to me, E.T. was deliberately manipulative with that rainbow, and it made me crazy. If it doesn't need a bow tied on it, don't put it there. It doesn't have to be so pat and perfect that everybody looks at it and says, ah, I need insulin. This is too sweet. There's a lot of things that are overkill. Learn to be aware of that. Is it too much? Just you should only do what is necessary to your story. And that includes, writing poetry about it, or, keep all these things to yourself. You should never put into your story more than 10% of what you thought about it. A lot of your world building is going to be internalized because you're going to write from the knowledge instead of putting the knowledge on paper.
Good. This is a nice little comment from Sherry Newman. This is the most inspiring and helpful Q&A I've done for quite some time. I'm grateful for your time, Jody. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. That's wonderful. I really appreciate that.
We're getting lots of nerd emojis. That's great. Okay, here we go. One of the best humorous sci-fi flash fiction stories is they're made of meat. Okay. Here we go. I've got a bunch of thank yous, thank you, thank you. So this is from Chase is having a field day here. What is your least favorite trope that you encounter?
I really hate I think I'll call him Adolf. Uh, I really hate those gotcha endings because that is, it's so obvious and it's really a cheap ending. If it was important to bring that forward, we need to have had an idea of it before, so that when they say, yes, I think that we'll call this Earth. And by the way, that's when we get a lot, is two aliens who are going to obviously be Adam and Eve. They're landing on the planet and they're going to start the world afresh, and it's always Earth. Why? Why does it have to be Earth? Let's have some other planets. Yes, we love Earth. We live here. Try something new. So I think that may be my least liked trope.
Okay, good. And then Russell Giles, you mentioned that a short story often needs a denouement, but an epilogue is frowned on. What differentiates the two?
The denouement is usually just, and then they got married. It's the summing up of what would be coming next if it actually needed to be said. If you know that the two, the hero and heroine, or two heroines, are going off, and you know that they're going to get married, that is an internal denouement. You don't actually have to say so. But if you do say so, that's pretty much the denouement, is tying up those loose ends so that we know for sure. That's not bad. An epilogue is where they say, and then they established the dynasty and ruled for 800 years after that. And here are the things that happened during that time, is really much more suited for a novel than for a short story. Because we are solving one problem, we are creating one situation. And you can say at the end of the story that, and together we will live for 800 years, and we will make this kingdom one where everyone is proud to live, without having to go into extra paragraphs or extra pages. You've told the story, now close off the energy.
Good. All right, and that comes to the end of our questions. Anything you'd like to say, Jody, that wasn't asked that you'd like to, as your closing comments on this thing? Besides, everybody enter the contest, please. You've got to the end of March to finish off quarter 2 of this year's volume 42 of Writers of the Future.
Yes, I expect to see Douglas Adams stories at some point. I want people to open up their imaginations. I would love to have something original, something that makes me just sit back and say, "Oh my God, I can't believe that I'm getting to read this." When something gobsmacks me, I love it. I love to be surprised by stories because, of course, I write a lot, but I read a lot. I want to know the next voice. I want to hear different points of view. I want something that's well researched. And believe me, you have to research even things that take place in your own town with people that you think you know. Even if you're an expert on a subject, there are questions that you must answer before you write about them. So introduce us to something that we have never known about: being a nurse, being a chiropractor, riding horses. All of these things have got new things to express to the world. So I love world building. I love good world building. And what do you have that isn't gleaned from other things that you have read? The trouble with, for example, AI is that nothing it does is original. It's scraping information off of stories that already exist. We can't help but be affected by what we read, and it's too easy for ideas to go in your eyes and out your fingers. As writers, it's something that you have to guard against. But if an idea comes in through your eyes, what can you do with it? How can you make it an original idea? You know, I don't necessarily want to see another Cthulhu story, a Frankenstein story, a Sherlock Holmes story. Those already exist. If you want to write Sherlock Holmes pastiches, passing into the public domain, go right ahead, publish them. But give me something that I can say, this has a speculate element that I can't resist. I am so thrilled by this. I want more. In fact, there are a few stories that I went through for this quarter that I wish that they had been books instead of just short stories. If you can do that, if you can bring me into that, I will be thrilled, and I will encourage you. In fact, I'll do what Anne McCaffrey did for me and for many other people: is, when's your next story coming out? When's your next book coming out? Because I want to know. I want to read it.
That's great. Well, thank you very much, Jody. And before I open it up for everybody to be able to say thank you, I also want to announce that we have the Meet the Illustrator Zoom event on March 7th. Emily's posting a link right now, so you can then sign up for that right there. It's March 7th at 7 p.m. Pacific time. And that's where you get to meet the illustrator winners and the art they submitted to win the contest. So now you're all welcome to unmute and say whatever you'd like to Jody.
Uh-oh.
Thank you, Jody.
Thank you for coming. I appreciate it. Taking time out of your day.
Yeah, it's been great.
Thank you, Jody.
Yes.
Thanks very much.
Thanks, Jody, and everyone at
Thank you, Jody.
Thank you, Jody.
Thank you, Jody. This is really informational and inspiring.
Sometimes hearing people talk about writing inspires me, so I can go back and say, I have the energy to go back and do the work that I've been avoiding. Everyone can procrastinate, just not now.
Thanks.
Very true. Thank you, Jody and John, for your time and these thoughtful answers. It really means a lot to me.
You're very welcome.
And thank you for people around the world coming to talk to us. I've seen at least 2 from Australia, and wow, thank you all for stopping by. Ontario, California.
Thank
I
you.
love
so
it.
Everybody for your questions, and Chase, you like scored on this one big
Thank you.
time.
I'm sorry, I have a lot of questions.
No, there's nothing to be
Ask
sorry about. It's
them.
great. You had a bunch of great questions.
We are here for that.
I'm really grateful for your answers and moreover for your just amazing encouragement. That means a lot to authors.
One of the reasons that I do what I do the way I do it is to give as much feedback as possible. It is not possible to write personalized letters to everybody, but there is some feedback.
Definitely.
Good.
So
Well,
go for it.
any
Write
of
a
you
story.
that are here, if you want to come to the Rising Future Gala, you can write to Emily, and it's on April 10th in Hollywood. If you can make it here, just write to Emily, and we can, or Joni, he's on the chat right now too. Write to
Joni
you
here?
and to see about getting an invitation to attend. We'd love to see you.
See you there.
Okay, great.
Good, come.
Okay, bye-bye, everybody.
Have a
Bye-bye.
great night.
Oh, thank
Thank
you.
you.
Hi,
Bye.
Jody.
Coming.
Wait, do we all
Thank
get to say
you.
goodbye? Okay.
And thank you very much, Jody. I'm going to sign off now.
Okay, great. Good night.
Good night.
Night.
Thanks. Thank you.